Hello YouTube and welcome back. As promised, real painting is going to happen on the channel today. These three models represent my newly bought Intercessor Space Marines. This is the easy to build Primaris Intercessors box set. The one in the middle, Sergeant, no head. As explained in the last video, that head will be done separately. And then these two are the general multi-purpose Happy Marines. This guy actually has some sort of grenade. I don't know if that's crack or frag. Someone in the comments will tell me if that is crack or frag. The colors that I have available to me are the ones that I've chosen for my, at the moment, limited line. Dark Reaper, Fenrisian Grey, and Administratum Grey. The idea is to go boom, 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 darker, lighter, lighter. And then I have a white as well if I need to mix in highlights. I have some metal colors if I want to do any chrome effects. We're not going to do anything too crazy today. Mostly we're going to try and put some paint in some models and see how this feels. I have never painted Space Marines before, so this should be very interesting. I will try to talk you through both what I'm doing and what I might be experiencing left or right. But let's get started. I think the brush we will use first is this shader brush, a number 6 shader from Handycrown, simply to apply some Dark Reaper on these models. The wet palette is ready to go. We have redone the wet palette, and like last time I will be using my dollar store injection needle to get the paint from the pot onto the palette, so as not to waste too much of it and to keep it nice and clean. These are brand new paints, so this is me opening them for the first time. Don't spill any, don't spill any, don't spill any. Success! In fact, that might need a shake. Hang on. There we go. Nicely shaken. That is super thick, which means that we will be watering that down quite a lot. In goes the needle. Boom. Slightly more perhaps. That looks like a good amount. Put that in the corner there. And then reclose this. As I mentioned before, the paint bottles don't close this super easily, but there it is. We will clean that out. Ooh, that's fun. I like cleaning that thing out. And we will clean off the tip as well. Nicely done. Okay, there's that. Let's get some water onto this wet palette. We'll move these paints out of your way. The wet palette is here. I'm not sure how much of that you can see. We're going to get some water down, and we're going to get this paint job started. That is nice and watered down. This should not be too thick at all. Suppose it doesn't really matter where I start, so let's start with this guy. Is that going to be in the view of the camera? Yes and no. No, don't fall in there, that's like a shower. That might be too wet. We'll see how it goes. I assume that when people paint Space Marines, everyone starts at the shoulder pads. Seems like a logical place to start. Who knows, I might be wrong. First thing is first, getting some of that paint on this model. I don't know much about the equipment, the war gear of the Astartes, as they are called, which is why I don't know if this is a frag or a crag grenade. But it also means that I am not sure which parts of the power armor are the main plates, so to speak, other than the pauldron and the chest, obviously, and which parts would be lighter plates or whatever. As far as color goes, I'm giving myself a license to do whatever I like, which at the moment is going real well because we're nowhere near yet. Get some of that blue in there. As I mentioned on the channel many videos ago now already, we're going to go relatively slow with this. If you see, oh, I don't need any paint on the bolter, I suppose, a bit different color. We're going to go relatively slow with this, and yet this first layer that you see me putting on is being put on liberally and quite quickly. That is because I know this first layer is not going to represent the end product. It is merely a color guide, and as diluted as this now is, it will need several coats anyway. So if you are worried about my judicial application of paint, have no fear. That will all be remedied in time. Good. In fact, we don't even have to wet blend yet because this is all just the base coat anyways. Now then. You could paint all these parts separately. These easy to build Primaris Marines are push lock kits, which means that you could very easily leave all the bits separate, paint them, and then push them together when they're dry. Obviously make sure your hands are clean if you're going to do that, but that is not what I've chosen to do. In fact, that's what I'm going to try and avoid doing for the most part. I am not an award-winning painter, as is clearly obvious, and I think learning to paint like this is probably fine. The effect we're going for are, for the time being, painted models. How well they're painted is not necessarily my primary concern at this point. I would obviously like them to be painted well, but the best way to learn how to do this is to just do it and not making it too complicated for yourself. Don't put up too many barriers when you're first starting out, as I am. Okay, don't do that, obviously. Don't put up too many barriers for yourself when you're just starting out. Saying like, oh, I'm going to have this first model be the most amazing model ever created. Probably unrealistic anyway. You'd have to be some sort of modern day Michelangelo, where you paint a model and show up at a painting competition and professional painters just break their brushes and quit in frustration because you're so amazing. Now, if that is something you want to try and do, by all means, blow me away, but let's not call that the default experience for new painters, such as myself. So, first impressions on this color, kind of worried this is going to end up looking like Space Wolves. I am not a huge Space Wolf fan, to be perfectly honest. I always suspect Space Wolf players are, well, I don't want to alienate all Space Wolf players day one, but I always suspect they're a little bit gung-ho. Like, oh my god, yes, fucking Space Marines with wolves and fangs, and, you know, just bravado and machismo that, I don't know, I think I've grown out of as I've gotten older. I think the Space Wolves are probably what I would have gone to in my teenage years, thinking they would be amazing, because they look cool. And do not mistake my reluctance to make these into Space Wolves to mean that they do not look cool. Space Wolves undoubtedly look cool. Some of their named characters especially have a lot of what looks like Norse or Celtic influence. Lots of animal pelts and heavy beards and things of that nature. And frankly, all of that is fantastic. But yeah, I think, you know, people change as they, a little bit more water there. People change as they get older. In my case, I've simmered down quite a lot, which is one of the reasons getting back into this hobby. The first time was not necessarily a success because I lacked both patience and discipline. Two things which you will find are useful in a hobby such as this, I'm sure. If you don't have patience, basically, you can't do this. And when I was young and foolish, patience was a virtue that was a challenge, let's put it that way. To some extent, I guess it still is. Like, when you get to painting these guys or building these guys, I'm sure everyone would like to finish them immediately or as soon as possible or whatever. But that is unlikely to happen here today. And that is okay. Or at least that has to be okay. Back to work tomorrow, which means that tomorrow there's probably very little painting going on. Although, you know, if this is your hobby, and I'm trying to make sure this is my hobby, I've really cut down on things like video games and stuff like that. If this is your hobby, you got to prioritize this stuff. Like, do you want to paint or do you want to sit there and do something else? That's fine. No one is going to judge you, at least if you are in my situation. The only people judging you would be your wife. And I just remembered everyone who watches this on YouTube. But if you're not broadcasting this and your wife is the sort of person that is okay with it, then you should find the time to do this stuff. Like, hey, sweetie, I'm going to go paint for an hour. Like, that, you know, that should be okay. Back to the first one. Is that dry? That is mostly dry. I don't want to strip paint by going in too quickly, but it looks like the only wet parts are in the recesses. Yeah, no, this camera still will not focus on these things that well, but hopefully you can see most of what I'm doing. I originally had the camera on the tripod, but the lighting situation plus the angle wasn't really doing any wonders for me. So I just put it back on top of the desktop monitor that I have and aimed it down, and that seems to be the best option at the moment. For those of you who've watched my other videos, you may recall Logitech was not exactly forthcoming with solutions to this camera issue. I have since dropped XSplit, the video capture software that the camera came with, this Logical C922. For the default Windows camera operation. One of the reasons was they updated the XSplit software, and the first video I took after that had massive reverb on the audio. And I had enough problems in my life without wanting to deal with that as well. So it got dumped. Now what you're seeing me doing here is just making sure that this base coat is applied over the priming, that I'm not missing any parts where later on you go, oh crap, I should have painted that and I didn't. Again, it's a very, very diluted paint, so you can get in all the recesses, and then where it pools a little, you can just dip your brush back into the pool and it pulls it right out. So you're not losing any of the detail this way. But this Dark Reaper color is a very toned down navy, not navy, what is that word? It's like a very bluish gray, cool color. It's not too dark. Like I primed these models black and then hit them from the top and a bit from the side with the lighter gray primer. And this blue over the top of it, you can clearly tell this is a different color, which was a bit of a problem on the Swarm Lord before, and it's not on these guys. That guy's a handy bolt rifle for me to grab and buy. It's worth pointing out at this point that these easy to assemble models, these arms are not glued in place. If you put too much pressure on these guys, they will rotate in their sockets, which is not necessarily what you want while you're painting. Although I could also imagine situations where that would be amazing, because you could move the arm and get to like this area underneath the elbow, for example, more easily, and then when it's dry, move it back. But at the moment, that's just theoretical. Someone in the comments is free to point out if they've done that, or if they think that's a good idea or a bad idea, and the reasons why. That is part of the point of this YouTube channel, is to give people a resource for beginners, where it's like, hey, I have this great idea, and the veterans can come by and say, yeah, no, don't do that because X, Y, and Z, and then you don't have to make that mistake. Painting these miniatures, by the way, is very therapeutic. The pace of life in the 21st century, like this perpetual interconnected state, and social media and things of that nature can get quite hectic, especially here in Japan, where people believe that an email is a lot like an instant message and requires an immediate answer, and people are very confused when it takes you more than 20 minutes. So this is, especially with doors closed behind me, this is like a sanctuary. Now you'll see me bleed some paint over on this bolt rifle. Again, not a problem. That'll do it for coat number 2 on the Sergeant, which means we're up to this guy. My painting speed is probably laughable to some of you, like those of you with large armies of Tyranids, Orcs, Guardsmen. I'm probably looking at this going, like, if I painted my army like this, I would finish somewhere in my late 80s. Which is fair. But then again, you have to remember, my goal is not to put these on a table and play games with them. Although, I will say, I'm interested in the kill team stuff, like painting up 5 guys and having a game that hopefully doesn't last like 6 hours. Sounds a lot more appealing to me than having apocalypse-style 40k battles, where 4 or 5 or 6 people spend a weekend in a musky room on diet sodas and pizza and try to kill each other, or not kill each other, as the case may be. But kill team sounds like just the thing for the discerning adult gamer who doesn't have a ton of time to devote to the gaming aspect of it and is more interested in the painting, modeling aspect of it. Speaking of modeling, I didn't do anything to the bases on these Marines, which again, some people may pull me up and say like, hey man, what about your bases? You can't just ignore your bases. And the answer is I didn't ignore the bases. The bases in this case are not the point. These models are never going to be display quality. They don't have to look like a coherent unit on a tabletop. We are just trying to enjoy painting them for the time being and learning some things while we do it. For example, you don't really realize how tiny a 7-foot Space Marine is until you scale it down to 28mm. And you have them right there. Let's do one more coat of this Dark Reaper. The naming conventions of the Games Workshop paint line, I don't pretend to understand. I'm not sure how much lore you have to know what all the names mean off the top of your head. But Dark Reapers sounds an awful lot like the Eldar heavy weapons teams, as I recall. And yet I do not recall them ever being this color. So Maybe that's me, maybe that's them, I don't know. I suppose this first layer of paint is the most boring one, unless you consider priming a layer of you painting. I would consider that a layer of you priming, which really doesn't require a brush. Because there's not a lot going on. You're hitting pretty much everything on a Space Marine like this, except for the bolter and the grenade. The grenade will be a different color. I haven't decided what. Probably something explosive-y looking, red, yellow, green even. But the next layer of colors will feature me wet blending some stuff. Which I've watched enough YouTube videos to know that people say, okay, that's an expert technique or whatever, and I'm a beginner and you're a beginner, and what are you doing? Wet blending is not an expert technique. Wet blending is the oldest technique in the book. It's how children paint. Children do not have the patience to wait for a layer of paint to dry, which means they mix paints all the time, and most kids' paintings turn out brown. But since we're no longer children, at least I don't know how old you are, but I'm not. Wet blending is not, in that sense, an expert technique. It's just something that you can do to help yourself with smoother gradations, and why wouldn't you? So there will be some of that on the next layer, which this isn't. Do we need another layer on the Sergeant? I do believe we do, especially down here. I would say far more expert techniques are things like edge highlighting, or at least edge highlighting well. To some extent, dry brushing. Like, dry brushing is not super hard, but I've seen good dry brushing, and I've seen mediocre dry brushing, and I've seen bad dry brushing. And so you might, if you're good at dry brushing, I would immediately assume that you're also an expert painter. Like, these two things in my mind would go together. I have dry brushed before, many years ago, and I remember it being not hard, but at the same time I also remember being not good at it. So there's that. And then edge highlighting, again, like, the guys who really do well with that, it's just amazing to see their stuff. That is not the goal here. They find highlights on armor that I didn't know existed. And to be perfectly frank, I'm not sure what their technique is. Like, I've watched a few videos on edge highlighting, but none of those videos do a really good job of showing me someone whose edge highlighting is stellar or noteworthy. Including, I saw Sam Len's videos, or at least some of them, through Adam Smasher's channel, Tabletop Minions. And of course, Sam is an amazing painter, make no mistake. But I don't remember watching him do much edge highlighting. I'm not saying he can't. I mean, obviously he can. I'm saying those videos I haven't seen, or maybe he hasn't done any for Adam or whatever. Pinterest, in that sense, is also good. Like, I've been on Pinterest quite a lot, looking at people's paint jobs, and there are clearly professional painters out there who really are pushing, I think, miniature painting about as far as you can hope for it to go. They are doing things with paint that I didn't know were possible, and I went to art school. That being said, it's a niche group of people, I guess, these miniature painters. And, you know, no one's going to confuse them with Rembrandt or Van Gogh or anything like that, but in our little world, they are the superheroes. Okay, I think that will do it for now. I will let them dry properly, thoroughly, and see how much more of the opacity disappears maybe do 1 or 2 more layers depending on how that goes. And then I'll come back with another video where we'll do the next layer. That will be this Fenrisian gray, which I believe is the Space Wolf color, mixed in with this Dark Reaper stuff as we start pulling out the highlighted areas. And then the mix will slowly become less Dark Reaper, more Fenrisian gray as we go along. And then ultimately I want to switch it over to this Administratum gray, which I'm not sure if this is a warm or a cold gray. It looks like a very neutral gray. If it is too warm, I may have to change tack and mix in some metallic color or something. But that was me doing the first layers of these Primaris Space Marines, including my headless sergeant. I hope that this kind of thing is the thing you're looking for. The Annihilation YouTube channel will continue to feature things of this nature. We will continue to paint, we will continue to do some modeling, which has been very limited up to now. And I will continue to talk you through what I'm doing as best as I can. If you do have specific questions, leave them in the comments. If there are questions I can answer for technique, I will do my best to answer them. If you have suggestions, comments, bitter complaints about what I'm doing, this is an open forum. You're free to leave those below. I ask that you be respectful to others, and if that's possible, to me as well. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.